when he goes out to inaugurate the school, David O. McKay stands in the middle of a sugarcane field and says, "From this school will go men and women who will be influences towards the establishment of peace internationally." And that blew me away. The commandment of fear not is the most repeated commandment in the scriptures. By far, it blows away everything else. And it's also probably the most violated.
You know that peace has been tried, but war has been used for the history of the world, like better than I think a lot of people.
Yeah, and peace is hard. It's all sort of a grand circle, because when I'm working on reconciliation, when I'm working on showing charity or kindness or love to others, it also brings me a sense of inner peace.
Welcome to Out of the Best Books, where we pull a book down from the Deseret Book Library and let it kick off thoughtful conversations. I'm Cole Wissinger.
And I'm Sarah Collins. For many of us, peace is something we imagine as a life void of opposition and tension. A calm home, a quiet heart, a life where nothing rubs, nothing breaks, nothing hurts. And while this is certainly aspirational, we know that life has inevitable conflicts. So as followers of Christ, we want to learn not to avoid conflict, but instead transform ourselves into the people who can navigate disagreement, tension, hurt, and disappointment in the ways that the Savior would.
Chad Ford has spent his life in the middle of some of the world's most painful conflicts, from war zones to family disputes. And he's learned that real peace requires work and mediation. And today, he's going to help us see that the call to be a disciple is at its heart a call to be a reconciler. Chad Ford is an international conflict mediator, facilitator, and a peace educator, and he is on the podcast with us today. Hello, Chad.
Hello. It's great to be on the podcast with you.
Oh, we're happy to have you.
So happy to have you. It's good to hear about you. Cole pointed this out in your bio, but Chad, you're a professional peace mediator, professional peacemaker. We didn't know that could be a career or really what that is. I want to know a little more. Who is Chad Ford? What got you to this wanting to, have you always been a peacemaker? Has this always been who you are?
I would actually think people would say I was a really good conflict instigator, right? Early in life.
Okay.
And went through a lot of things when I was growing up that made me really interested in conflict in general, and especially sort of larger scale socio and political conflict. I had no idea, like you, that there was a job or a career out there like that. But I found myself as a senior at BYU Hawaii, really not knowing what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, or I wasn't quite graduated yet, but it looked like I was going to graduate. And I just didn't really know. I actually had thought about being a filmmaker and was interested in that. I was actually a history major with a minor in political science and sociology at BYU Hawaii. And I was, writing a little bit historically about conflict and peace movements and, some things like that. But my senior year, Neal A. Maxwell, who was an apostle at the time, came onto campus to inaugurate our new university president. And in the inauguration, he told the backstory about the creation of BYU Hawaii, which I had never heard before. I had no idea why the church had a university in Laie, Hawaii. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, actually, but I loved it. It was, so international. It was so vibrant. And when he told the story about a young David O. McKay as a young apostle in his 30s out on a mission as an apostle to check in on all of the areas of the church after World War I, checking in on the saints in the various branches of the church that existed internationally at the time. He saw all this devastation. He saw the product of a absolutely devastating war that killed 18 million and injured another 25 million people. And when he was visiting Laie, he has a vision. And in the vision, he sees a school and he sees people from all over the world coming to this school and studying peace. And he's so excited about it that he sends a telegram back to Salt Lake as the junior apostle saying, "Look, I've had a vision. I'm a prophet, seer, and revelator. Here's what I think the church should do." And the answer was no. for 34 years. It
interesting.
was difficult. Light EA was very, very isolated. It would have been extremely inefficient and expensive to build a school like that. But eventually, David O. McKay becomes prophet of the church. And within just a few weeks of becoming the prophet, he starts laying the groundwork for what was then called the Church College of Hawaii. And when he goes out to inaugurate the school, he stands in the middle of a sugarcane field and says, from this school will go men and women who will be influences towards the establishment of peace internationally. And that blew me away. I was in the speech at the time. I heard that. I thought that was the coolest story. I don't know why I hadn't really heard that before. I'd never really thought about BYU Hawaii in those terms. And the second thing I started thinking about, man, I wonder which one of my classmates is going to do that. Like, I know some really cool international students, people who could come back and be diplomats, maybe even presidents of their own country. Like, there were so many cool people. But I became so intrigued by it that I started researching more about President McKay and the creation of the school. I was actually up in the archives in the library just reading more about it. And I started to understand that David and McKay saw that vision for every student that went to BYU Hawaii. That was his original purpose for the school. And I took that really seriously. There was just something inside of me that said, well, I want to do that. That sounds awesome. And then the next problem is like, well, how do you do it? Right. Like, I mean, that's a really, really difficult thing to do. And so I started researching what to do. And the only thing I could come up with is I'll go to law school and, maybe I'll study like international human rights or civil rights or something like that. And so I applied to law schools. I got into Georgetown University. Found out, no offense, that lawyers tend to do better at making conflict than resolving it sometimes. Yeah. And then when I was there, I sat in on a speech from Dennis Ross, who was the chief U.S. negotiator for Middle East peace at the time. And he was talking about his work. And I was just, in the audience at the time. And he started, again, talking about the need for peacemakers. He started talking about the need for more people to be trained in this. He started talking about where he saw opportunities and challenges. And the same fire just relit inside of me. And I went and talked with him afterwards. And he pointed me to George Mason's Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, and especially to a man named Wallace Warfield, who was one of the first African-American mediators in the United States. And I skipped school the next day. I went down and visited with them, ended up doing a joint degree in law and conflict analysis and resolution, and took my first job in Northern Ireland during the, peace accords for the Good Friday agreements, and have been a practicing mediator since then. Everything from like family mediation to like child custody stuff to working with organizations to large scale conflict. And really for the last 20 years, primarily in the Middle East, working with Israelis and Palestinians.
I love that background. I love that you come to this with that kind of high stakes mediation behind you. And even just being a passionate about U.S. history, or just history before that, is that this isn't some kind of naive first year freshman, peace can save the world kind of ideal. You know that, peace has been tried, but war has been used for the history of the world, like better than I think a lot of people.
Yeah. And peace is hard. And it takes work, it takes resources, it takes training, it takes skills, it takes a particular mindset and way of seeing ourselves and others in the world. And after a few years practicing, it just became really clear to me, like, that's the other part that I want to do. I want to train other people to be able to do this. And so I actually went back to BYU Hawaii and was the founding director of the David O. McKay Center for Intercultural Understanding. And there is where we built the first in the church, intercultural peace building. It started as a certificate. It eventually became a major, and really started training young International Latter-day Saints about good peacemaking skills, training from every level, from family work to organizational work to nonprofit work to international work. And, at this point, we have thousands of graduates around the world doing this work, and it intrigued me to come back to Utah, where programs like this didn't exist. And through a really generous donation from a man named Mehdi Haravi, the Haravi Peace Institute at Utah State was just born recently. And I came on as one of their first faculty members to help with a great group of people, including people like Patrick Mason and Tammy Proctor and others, to build out a really robust peacemaking program here in the state of Utah. That's
fabulous. And I have so many questions, and I'm excited to kind of like where to start, because one thing I'm thinking, I'm feeling prompted to talk about is that a title for the Savior is the Great Mediator. I mean, talk about an important part of our own culture, and you get to step into that role in just a human level. Chad, I'd love to kind of hear your take on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. First of all, I think Jesus is among the greatest of peacemakers of all time.
Absolutely.
I'm not even talking about the religious aspects of it. I'm actually just talking about the sort of skills and behaviors that he shows in the New Testament in navigating conflict. In any great conflict resolution practitioner, whether they're Christian or not Christian, religious or not religious, has to tip their hat to Jesus because he's inundated with conflict in the New Testament. And he handles it so expertly and so powerfully. And it's been Jesus's example that inspired some of the greatest peacemakers in the world. People like Martin Luther King, who directly were connecting what Jesus was doing in the New Testament. People like Mahatma Gandhi, who wasn't even Christian, who reads Jesus in the New Testament and takes many of the ideas and incorporates it into the independence movement in India. Howard Thurman, we could go on and on and on. And I was really lucky that when I was in graduate school, I also was connected to religious peace builders. John Paul Lederach, who was a Mennonite, and a lot of people don't know the Mennonites, but they're a Christian peace church. And they, in the 1800s, started to look at that title of Jesus as peacemaker and said, we're going to take that really seriously. Like, what does that look like? Should we be teaching this every Sunday in our congregation? Should we be singing songs about it? And they, along with the Quakers, created what is now modern mediation. So when a mediator today in the West starts mediating, the skills that they're using, the training, they don't know it, but it was created by the Quakers and Mennonites back then with a very, very close religious tie, scriptural references to virtually everything that you would do. That's all sort of changed modernly now. But I got to study under John Paul Lederach, who still deeply wove his Christian experiences with his conflict resolution experiences. But I also got to work with others like Rabbi Mark Gopin, who was doing this from a Judaism perspective, and Muhammad Abu Nimr, who is doing this from the perspective of Islam, and then working in Northern Ireland on what was in some aspects a religious conflict, and then in the Middle East as well. It's hard for me to separate those things out. And my most recent book was about that. 70 times 7 was about Jesus and how Jesus goes about this, and a call for us as Christians and as Latter-day Saints to take Jesus's role here more seriously.
Which is interesting because we talk about, I have this idea maybe of heaven and the next life. Kind of peace in my head is like no conflict. It's no, nothing that rubs, right? It's all kind of this thing. But if, I guess maybe, let me push here. Is Christianity, is the thing we're working toward to be better conflict resolvers? Does that kind of, does A plus B equal that the next life there's still going to be things to be learning, conflict resolution in some way? And you can't answer that probably in a doctrinal way, but what is your take on that?
I actually think that I can, because at least we know in the pre-mortal existence that there was a lot of conflict, right? There was actually a war in heaven. So God was experiencing conflict among his spirit children at the time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's part of LDS theology that I actually think is so powerful in and especially in our faith tradition, about thinking about conflict, because a lot of other Christian denominations don't have that same backstory, or not filled out to the extent that the Latter-day Saints do. In thinking about, here you think God, it's all heaven, it's great, but God has children, and those children are struggling to get along and fighting over what the plan of salvation is going to be. And a third of the host of heaven, right, break away, and then you have this whole existence of God creating this planet and the people within it. And in the book of Moses, you have God weeping over the fact that he says, behold, I gave them 2 commandments, right? That they should choose me and that they should love one another, but behold, they hate their own blood. Right? It's like one of the most startling moments, this father in heaven weeping and sorrowing because his children can't get along. They're going to kill his only begotten son when he sends them down to earth.
Yeah, talk about conflict.
Yeah, talk about conflict, and talk about God experiencing conflict. So to think that somehow all of that ends at some point, right? And that we're going to just be conflict free. I think that's part of the message of Jesus when he talks about building the kingdom of heaven on earth, and that we can't just look to heaven. We have to be able to build it here. This is part of, in LDS terminology, Zion, and building a Zion-like community. And even when you get to the book of Revelation, and you think about Satan finally being defeated in the book of Revelation, it's not through fist, it's not through war, it's not through violence. Satan is bound through the blood of the Lamb. He is bound through love. All of the things that are actually spelled out for us really clearly in Doctrine and Covenants, section 121, are the ways that evil is defeated. And whether I'm thinking about evil at a very family level or local level or an international level, Jesus has so much to teach us about how we should respond.
And yet, just hearing those teachings doesn't automatically translate into peace, because the hosts in heaven understood God's plan, and yet there was still conflict to be had. And Jesus's words, while they have inspired many great people that you listed off a litany of those that have been inspired by his words, Christian theology has also inspired a lot of violence and a lot of contention through the years to be on the other side of peace also. And so if it's not just knowing that, like, what it is that's being said, how do we practice and actually accomplish some peace with the right tools in our tool belt?
When President Nelson has been calling for peacemakers, and by the way, he's actually been doing that for a really long time. In 2003, he gave a conference talk, then as an apostle, that was called Peace is Possible, that I actually think is one of the great talks of all time. He was instrumental, by the way, in us getting the first peace building program at BYU Hawaii. He was on the board at the time. I actually had to make a presentation to him as a young faculty member at the time. He was Elder Nelson back then, at the time. And he told me at the end of the presentation, look, the world needs more peacemakers. And if you think about that, I think it breaks into 2 things. One is a conversion to believe Jesus. First of all, it requires belief. It requires seeing in a particular way our brothers and sisters as brothers and sisters, of recognizing that they're on the same sort of mortal struggle that all of us are in, that our brothers and sisters are not enemies. They are children of God. It requires us to practice certain principles that Jesus teaches again and again, like that we don't throw stones, we roll them away, that we take risks of embrace, that we participate, as Paul says, in the gospel of reconciliation, and a belief that that's what it's about. It's not just about individual salvation. It's about bringing back together the family of God and filling God's house again with his children, not excluding them, not trying to make it as small as possible, but understanding that we have a loving heavenly Father who wants all of their children back. And we can be disciples among the way. So it's skills, but it's also requires a deep belief that this is the way that the universe works. This is what God is up to. This is what Jesus is up to. And if we're going to call ourselves disciples or are going to call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ, then those are the things that we should be up to as well. And I think you hear modern prophets talking about this and talking about conversion and thinking about it deeply, more than just I read it, I believe it, but do I believe it in my soul enough that it changes the way that I see and act in the world?
What's interesting about this is that I can kind of think of a world in which I have peace. I have inner peace. I'm unbothered maybe. And that's not what I'm hearing from you. It's not that. It's community. It's because I think that there's two ways to look at peace. It's like my peace and your peace, right? I can say I'm resolving a conflict and it took this. And sometimes resolving a conflict actually requires not having to be doing it the right way or your way. How does that make us become more like Christ? Because there is one truth, one peace that we ultimately want to get to, but yet that's not what we're saying here.
Yeah. Well, we certainly didn't see Jesus just sit on a rock
and
feel inner peace. He does at times excuse himself.
Yeah.
There are times that Jesus goes to meditate, to fast, to work on, I think, something that you talk about that's really important, which is inner peace. Mm-hmm. But I always see that inner peace as creating the fortitude to go out and create the peace with others.
Yeah.
The peace in the community. It's not an end of itself. It is to help us have the strength, the courage to do the other work. And so for anybody that says, okay, well, peace is just something that I feel inside, it's both true, and Jesus talks about that type of peace, but he also emphasizes peace with others, peace in communities, taking care of what Jesus refers to as the least of these, which is a community responsibility. And he emphasizes even this is a fancy theological term, but eschatological peace, right? Which is sort of peace at the end of time, right? That all of this culminates in some sort of grand event that happens around the second coming again. But again, that's not because Jesus just goes and fixes it all for us. It's because of something that we build together with him in this life, and then that echoes into the world to come. And so I find that I can't just be complacent. I can't just bury my head in the sand. I can't just go up. I just got back from a long backpacking trip, through Yosemite and the sequoias, and I can't just stay on that trail forever, not see other human beings, just hear nature, feel the wind, and be at peace. Those are important moments for all of us to take and to find ways to reground ourselves and to reconnect ourselves. But the work is not about you, and it's not about me. It's about us. It is the work of reconciliation, and that requires us in relationship with others. All conflict, by the way, in my opinion, is relational. It's all relational. Salvation is relational. Joseph Smith brought some really powerful truths to the temple about just how relational heaven is going to be someday. And so as LDS peoples, we talk about how much we love the fact that one of our teachings is eternal families, right? That we can be sealed together. It's odd to me sometimes when I don't think I need to put the work into creating those harmonious relationships here on earth. Like somehow I'm going to be really excited to be with my family in the next life, but I don't really want to have anything to do with them here.
I've been sealed, so it's taken care of, right? It'll be fine then, but it may be just that.
Yeah,
I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding and read of the scriptures.
So you talk about that inner peace, and going on that backpacking trip must have been a great little building block, because what I'm hearing from some of this here is that maybe that is a good first step, though. It's hard to be able to spread some peace and be able to have peaceable interactions with your relationships if you haven't already gotten like a little bit of peace. But walk us through maybe that next actionable item. If Sarah and I were having like conflict in our podcast, and planning something, let's say we check the box of inner peace. What is your next mediation thing that you talk about?
Cool. I wish it was so simple as like we check that box because, look, it's cyclical, right? It's all sort of a grand circle because when I'm working on reconciliation, when I'm working on showing charity or kindness or patience or love to others, it also brings me a sense of inner peace, right? And so, sometimes people say, well, I can't help anybody else until I get there myself. And I'm often like, look, sometimes it's in the help. It's in the stepping into that it actually brings the peace. I as a missionary, I was terrified to go on a mission. I was a convert to the church. I didn't feel like I understood the doctrine well enough to really be a teacher. And it hindered the first few months of my mission because I constantly could think about why I wasn't qualified, why I wasn't good enough, why every other missionary in the field was better than me. And then that showed up in my interactions. And it really took a life-changing moment for me where someone that I was teaching pointed to my badge on my chest and asked me to leave. And when I asked her why, she said, because I thought you were here representing Jesus. Wow. But I don't think that you are. That I had one of those powerful spiritual experiences of, I've got to let go of fear. I've got to let go of being in my head. This is not about me. I am here to help people feel the Spirit. And the Spirit is the thing that does the converting. And I just need to fundamentally approach my mission differently. And when I did that, it brought me a level of confidence and peace that I'd never really had before. And so, fear to me is actually what I think is the big first step that we're wrestling with here. And it's interesting that the commandment of fear not is the most repeated commandment in the scriptures. By far, it blows away everything else. And it's also probably the most violated, right? Like all of us can say, I violate that commandment sometimes like daily, right?
Yeah.
Like every week. And
sometimes you live in the violate, right? Like you're just living in fear or
Yeah. And think about what fear does to us. Physiologically, it puts us in fight or flight mode or freeze mode. Our brain is trying to defend or protect ourselves. We've got adrenaline churning through our veins in those moments. And what is a really helpful biological response to like, oh, there's a lion right now, and I need to really run fast, or I need to be strong enough to fight it off, turns out to be destructive in human relationships, right? It invites us to do the very things that we shouldn't do. And spiritually, it blinds us. And I think this is the point, because it blinds us from the truth that the people that I'm struggling to collaborate with right now are children of God, that they're people of value and worth just like me, that they have needs, desires, and wants just like me. When I'm experiencing fear, those blinders come on, and I have a hard time seeing it. And I start doing behaviors and speaking and acting in ways that exacerbate or make conflict worse, not better, right? And so I actually think the first thing, and you see Jesus doing this again and again, is how do I tamp down the fear? How do I replace those eyes that I'm seeing the world with what Paul refers to as the eyes of our heart, right? Jesus sees with the eyes of his heart. He sees people perfectly. And it's not that he doesn't see weakness or sin. He sees those things quite well, but he also sees divinity. He sees dignity. He feels love. And it's so interesting how many people that, we would frame as sinners that he encounters. When Jesus encounters them, their response is so different than when the Pharisees encounter them. The Pharisees condemn, they throw stones, what have you. When Jesus sees them, they drop their sins. They come unto him. And one of my favorite stories in all the scriptures, and I think the video version of this in The Chosen is just fantastic. If you've seen The Chosen, is the woman at the well and the interaction that Jesus has with her that starts with resistance and fear and all of those different things. But Jesus is relentless in seeing her and seeing through all of that and seeing her worth and her divinity in ways that ends with her laughing and running back to her village saying, look, I have seen the Messiah. If we're disciples, those are the same sorts of encounters that people should have with us. They should feel seen. They should feel heard. They should feel listened to. They should feel understood. They should feel safe in our presence, even if they are making mistakes, even if they are sinning. They should see that that's not a barrier for my love towards you, and it's certainly not a barrier between God's love and you.
But what about that third person? So when I have sinned, when I have made a mistake, right? Other people can forgive me. That'd be nice. Hopefully they do. God is going to forgive me. We know that. But then at some point I need to forgive myself, and theoretically I have some control over that other than those other two things. And yet that is a big roadblock for a lot of people.
Yeah. I actually would frame it just slightly differently. You need to trust that God forgives you, right? It's not actually about forgiving ourselves. It's actually letting the atonement in. It's a barrier that we put between ourselves and God that says that I don't believe that the atonement applies to me in this type of situation. And it actually is a form of sin in and of itself. Right. And a powerful one, because as we attest to the divinity of Jesus, of the power of atonement, we are also carving out exceptions. And Cole, I think it's really important that you bring up, sometimes we carve out those exceptions towards others. The atonement doesn't apply towards you or that sin or that mistake. That's sometimes the reaction we have. And you're absolutely right that sometimes we're the hardest on ourselves, that we believe it actually applies to everybody else out there, but not towards me. And that is a moment to sort of recognize what we're actually saying in those moments. It has nothing to do with whether we're forgiving ourselves or not. It's actually whether we believe that Jesus has the power to forgive us, whether God still sees us and loves us, whether sin is not just part of the plan. It's part of the expectation of being mortal and human in this life. Sin is an opportunity for us to come closer to the divine, to change, to experience the atonement powerfully in our lives, to let God take our stony heart and turn it into something fleshy. And instead of experiencing shame in those moments, we experience it as an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become closer to Jesus Christ. And my experience has been that every time I've had to apply the atonement into my life, as scary as it is, as hard as it is for me to believe, when I embrace it, something beautiful and good happens to me and my soul that somehow makes me even better than who I was before I made the mistake, and creates a deeper and more powerful relationship with the only person that can really save.
Yeah, what you're saying is conflict resolution is how we become more like our Savior. It's the first step in actually getting the atonement into our lives. That's incredible. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, and if we can see it if we can see God's love and feel God's love towards us that way, then hopefully it changes our hearts and minds so that we can see it applying equally to whoever it is who hurt me, whoever it is who has offended me, whoever holds that belief that I find abhorrent, right? That I see that same process being able to work through them. And while I am not the atoner, I cannot forgive sins. I can forgive. I can open up my arms. I can invite relationship. I can invite reconciliation. I can do all of the very same things that Jesus does, except I can't forgive sin. That's what Jesus does, right? Mm-hmm. But all the other things I can do.
That's incredible. Maybe as just kind of a final question or a final spot to land, I'd love to know how you've seen this conflict resolution, this peacemaking. Perhaps you have a story come to mind, or a person, or yourself, where it really has transformed how these people, how you yourself, whoever it is, see the Savior, see themselves, and can go forward being different, actually taking actionable steps to get there.
I get to see it almost every day, first of all. And it's really powerful. One of the blessings of doing professional peacemaking is that I get to see reconciliation. I get to see people change. I get to see their hearts changed. I get to hear them explain the experience in a way that helps me understand why I can create space and do certain things. There's something else at work, something heavenly that is also at work. It's created deep trust in me that God cares deeply about this. And when we are seeking to reconcile and to make peace, God comes to our aid. The Holy Ghost comes and often gives us the words to say or the things to do for others. That a really great prayer to offer every day is to help me understand and see and say the words and do the things that will invite reconciliation between me and whoever that is. But it's also been deep in my own life. I wish I could tell you both that because I've been studying this and practicing this for the last 25 years, that I am conflict free now. It's not true. In fact, I quit even using the term conflict resolution because what I've come to understand is that conflict is. It is part of life, but it doesn't have to be destructive. It can be constructive, right? Conflict can help me understand someone more deeply, can help me get in touch and practice empathy and charity in ways that nothing else can if I want to embrace it. If I run from it or I fear for it, and I understand that there's a line in the scriptures that say contention is of the devil, but conflict and contention are not the same thing. To me, contention is destructive conflict. It is conflict used to hurt or demean or to punish others, but conflict doesn't have to be used that way. It can be used to understand, to get creative, to solve problems in the world, and that has been part of a shift for me. Because I used to think, when can this end? And like, how do I get to that space, right, where I never have conflict anymore? And what I wake up every day now is with a sense of, because we are human beings, we won't always see things the same way. We won't always have the same needs. They won't always be aligned, even with my wife and my children, let alone the people in my work and in the community and what have you. And that's okay. That's God made us different for a reason. There's a reason that there's so much diversity in the world. It gives us lots of opportunities to practice peacemaking in the world. Instead of trying to change others, what I want to do is understand others and find ways of loving them, even when we disagree. And this came to head for me with a conflict that I had over several years with my father. My father was suffering from a disease called spinocerebellar degeneration. It deeply affected his ability to walk, to speak, to have fine motor control, and caused tremendous pain inside my father. He suffered for years. And when he was diagnosed with the illness, he actually left our family. He didn't want our family to have to deal with that. He did not want my mom to be his caretaker. He thought it was going to financially ruin us. But the result was devastating. He came back several years later. And at that point, my mom had remarried, but he came back into my life and we had a really great relationship. But as his disease progressed and the pain worsened, my father wanted his life to end. He didn't see purpose in it. Quality of life was poor. And one night he attempted to take his life. And he had called me and asked me if I would be there with him as he passed. And I panicked and called 911 and intervened. Luckily, they were able to save his life. But unluckily, my father felt very betrayed. Mm-hmm. And felt like I had interfered in something that was his right to do, and just deeply and profoundly didn't understand his suffering, and that the move that I had made was a selfish one. And I fought with my father for several years over this to the point that we quit speaking to each other. We quit talking to each other. I was deeply entrenched that I was right and had made the right decision, and my father had made the wrong one. He was equally sure that he had made the right decision and that I had betrayed him. And there was a sense of bitterness between both of us about this. And years later, he made another attempt, but this time by refusing to eat. He was in a veterans thing at the time, and I had his power of attorney. And so I had doctors calling to say, Chad, do you want to intervene again? We can put a feeding tube in. We can stop this. I was so mad, so frustrated with my dad, so angry that this had come up again, felt like I was being put in a terrible position again. It was almost like a test. And so I flew out to see my dad, had a confrontation with him for the first time in years. It did not go well. I did not approach it with the compassion or love that I had actually been trained to do. I approached it with frustration. He sensed it, was right back at me. And I left that day with a threat that if you don't start eating, I'm going to order a feeding tube down your throat, and you can see how that goes. And it was that night that I was at my brother's house and found one of his old journals and began to read it and saw my dad's life through a perspective that I had not quite seen before. Saw this man of faith believe that God was going to heal him, call upon priesthood blessings, paying 20, 30% in tithing, hoping that when I served my mission, I was the only member of the family to serve a mission, that if I served my mission well, it would heal him. But he just kept getting worse. He just kept feeling more isolated, and his pleading to God to end it at the end, even that wasn't coming. And at the very back of the book was a picture of my dad jumping over hurdles when he was a small boy. And that picture hit me at the core. I'd never seen my dad run, jump a hurdle, walk. He was always pretty disabled when I was there. And it was in that moment of seeing him without fear through the eyes of my heart that the Spirit instructed me to do something different than I'd done before. Quit resisting him, quit fighting him, just love him, and have deep empathy for where this man is coming from. And that terrified me, because I knew if I did that, then my dad was probably going to quit eating, that I was going to be standing there by his side. But when I approached him the next day on my knees with tears rolling down my face, telling my father how much I loved him, how much I cared for him, how sorry I was for the things that I did, my father paused for quite a long time before he began yelling for the nurse. And then as the nurse came, he told her, please bring me a cheeseburger. And I told my dad, man, no, not a cheeseburger. You need a steak. I've been eating in a while. And we had this reconciliation moment. It was so powerful. My brothers and sisters came. We talked. We laughed for the first time in a long time. And about a year later, I got another call that my dad had pneumonia, that his lungs were filling up with fluid, that he had asked the doctors to not artificially intervene. He was going to pass. I needed to get there. And when I got by his side, he'd been in a coma for about a day. He pulled out of his coma as soon as I got there and said, in typical dad fashion, what took you so long? I told him I loved him, and I told him, hey, you finally are getting what you asked for, and I'm happy for you. I see you're suffering. I want you to know it's okay. And then a strange thing happened. My dad didn't die for like 3 days. He sat there gurgling, struggling to breathe. The doctors had no idea what was going on or why it was happening. And in a quiet moment with it, just my dad and I, he actually came back out of his coma, and he said the word, I'm afraid. I said, Dad, what are you afraid of? This is what you've wanted. You're a man of faith. And he started listing off all the mistakes that he had made in life, including leaving our family, all the things that he had done wrong. And he wasn't sure that when he got to the other side, how God would see him, how he would react to him. And then he asked for a blessing. And when I gave that blessing to him, I will never forget it. I couldn't speak the power of the love that I felt from God flowing through me. The priesthood is built upon that power surging through me. And I remember saying, I didn't know. Like, I just have never felt anything this powerful in my life. And the instructions were simple. You're my son. I love you. Come home. I'm waiting for you. And my father passed away about 15 minutes later. The last breath, a tear rolled down his face and he smiled. I walked away from that experience with actually two profound thoughts about peace. One, the power of love that our Father has for us is the thing that moves mountains, moves rivers, changes the world and changes us. I experienced it at such a powerful level that I knew that I could not deny it or walk away from it anymore. The deep, deep love that our Father has for us. And the second thing was that I would have never had that experience if I hadn't reconciled with my Father. If I hadn't done the hard work of changing my heart and finding a way forward with him. And I don't take that for granted anymore. I don't know in every human relationship whether this is our last day or one of many days. I don't know when that time is going to come for each of us. And so I do the work now. I respond to conflict quickly in my life. I recognize deeply that the greatest source of peace and happiness that I can have is to feel connection and love with the people in my life, both my family, my friends, my community leaders, and over time, I've felt that through people of the world, the people of Israel, the people of Palestine that I work with, so many other people. And I know this is God's work. It is the work of reconciliation. I know that this is why we're here. And I know that this whole thing is hopefully to bring God back to a full house, all of us brothers and sisters back together again.
Wow, Chad, I'm overcome. Thank you for sharing that testimony. God's work is reconciliation. So thank you so much, Chad Ford, for being on our podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Chad. Chad Ford's new book, 70 times 7, Jesus' Path to Conflict Transformation. Of course, 70 times 7 being the reference to Christ's lesson of forgiveness in the New Testament. That book is on sale now at Deseret Book, where you can access it on the app, on Deseret Bookshelf Plus's app, where you can get lots of audiobooks, ebooks, and also podcasts. We will see you next time on Out of the Best Book.